Thanks to the Heritage Council for bringing me all the way here from the north of Papua Westry. And as my introduction said, I am the Heritage Ranger on the island of Papua Westry. Actually, its proper name is Papay. Nobody on Papay would call it Papua Westry. They would probably say it's a cartographical misnomer. Westry is our neighbouring island. We like them, but we don't like them that much. They actually have to be called the same name as well. So, for those who don't know where Papay is or what Papay is, Papay is one of the most northern islands of the Orkney archipelago, which comprises about 70 islands off the north-eastern tip of Scotland, separated by the Pentland Firth from the north of Scotland. Sits at about 59.35 degrees north, which is about the same as Norway, British Columbia and Alaska. They're probably a bit more exciting places, but we sit on the same line as well. Orkney is blessed with some pretty amazing archaeology, and Papay certainly has its fair share. As part of my role as a Papay Ranger, I run guided tours of the island, I do boat trips, and if you ever go to a remote island anywhere in the world, you find that most people usually have 10, 15 different jobs, and I'm no different in that as well. But my main job is to do tours of the island, which includes lots of the archaeology on the island as well. And I decided that the best way for me to get across what Papay is about and what I do on the island is to actually try and give you a tour of the island as well. It'll be quite a big tour. I think there's probably more people in this hall than actually live on Papay, so that could be the biggest tour I've ever done. Unfortunately, you only get the words and the photographs and not the real thing, but probably good for your waistline because you don't get this cake twice a day either. So I'm going to give you a quick, super fast, rocket-fired tour of Papay. And there's a saying on Papay that you're never more than 5 yards from a cake, and I can definitely vouch for that, as you can see. But first off, I'll start off a little bit of history about myself, how I ended up in Papay. Obviously, I'm not Orcadian. I come from North Staffordshire, not quite as glamorous as Orkney, I don't think. I would be called an interloper, or a ferry loper, or a blow-in on Papay, I think. And Alan Hurston is the oldest person on Papay now. He's 80, and he always say that I'm Unken, which means unken, unknown, a stranger. So it's a great place to be, apart from Ellen. So I'll start with a bit of history really, and this is my Guardian of the Orcs bit. I began about 2013, my first visit to Papay, and I went there to see where the Great Orc lives. I'll bring him up now. Yes. So this is the Great Orc. At that time, in my career as an artist, I became quite obsessed with black and white birds, and that trail eventually led to the Great Orc. Bird itself is extinct now, and I always wanted to go and see one, but I thought, well, I'm never going to see one. But maybe the next best thing would be to go where they once lived. And the Great Orc lived on Papay until about 1813, and the pair on Papay were killed by a local William Fowles, and that was the last breeding pair of Great Orcs in the UK. They lived on for about another 30 years in Iceland, but once they were taken, that was it. That was the end for the Great Orcs. It's a large flightless bird. And that really was its downfall. A big, fat bird which happened to live mostly on the kind of northern side of the world, so around from Newfoundland, Greenland, Iceland, down to Orkney. Lots of transatlantic sailors would get to the other side of Atlantic and think, we need food, and the Great Orc became the food for the sailors. That's a very short description of what happened to the Great Orc, really. I stayed on the island for a week over Christmas for my first visit. I was taken in by a local family for Christmas dinner. Got taken into all the dances, all the kind of social occasions, made to serve cakes at the Christmas carol service, and eventually you find yourself kind of enveloped into the island, which I think is quite a popular thing on Orkney. That tends to happen to quite a lot of people. This is the first map that I ever drew of Papay, which kind of details the walks that I did around the island at that time, mostly walking around the coastline, just really finding out lots of things that were going on, and really kind of finding my own way around the island, really. Little did I know that about a year later, I would actually sell my house, give up my job, and move in my little white van all the way to Papay, and take up my job as the Heritage Ranger for the island. And I work for the Papay Development Trust, which is a charitable trust made up of volunteer trustees, which really runs kind of most of the strategic things on the island, including tourism, employment and housing and things like that. Not actually showing Papay actually, so I'll probably better show it to you. This is it. Which is a good description of the island. Folk from Papay are called Doondies, and somebody at one time actually thought that the island was shaped like an ill-thriven cod, I can't really see that, but that's what somebody thought. And the people who lived in the Papay were the worms that lived in its belly. So we're the Doondies from Papay. The island is 4 miles long from top to bottom, 48 metres above sea level, its highest point, so the mountaineering club has not quite taken off just yet. That's up on North Hill, right on the top, up there. I won't point to it, but it's there. It's about 3/4 of a mile wide at its widest point. Population for the island at the moment is about 90 folk. Back in 1861, when the first census was done of the island, there was about 390 people on the island. So there's been big changes in population, and you could kind of reckon that most of the northern isles of Orkney have lost probably about 3/4 of their population in the last 150 years. And really that's still a concern now, when the Papay Development Trust will always have one eye on how many people are living on the island, who's coming to the island, keeping the school going, and things like that. So, and tourism plays a big part in that. Obviously, the main economy on the island at the moment is farming, but that may not last forever. So I think the more the kind of people get people visiting the island, seeing the island, coming and wanting to live on the island, the more the better, really. I'll pick up a few numbers about the island, which might give you a bit of a sense of what type of place it is. We have one primary school, one shop, 2 kirks, 3 alpacas, 3 piers, 5 farms, 2 nurses, 1 teacher, 5 firemen, 1 post office, and the pub is open once a week on a Saturday at 8 o'clock. But we do have 5 public toilets. I just thought I'd pick that with I was not going to say that, but I thought, well, I'm going to pick up on a bit on the loose theme, I think. So we're very good for public toilets. Papay, like many of the Northern Isles, is a very low-lying, very gentle island, really, apart from Hoy, which is quite high, but we're quite low-lying. And I think probably the best description of the Orkney Islands was made by George Mackay Brown, very famous Orkney writer, who saw them as almost like whales, kind of breaching from the sea and just gently rising from the sea, then going back under the water again. And I think that really kind of describes them quite well, better than I could anyway. And this is Southwick on the east coast of Papay, a very gentle shoreline, taken in rainbow season, which is usually about September or something like that. But landscape-wise, it can be quite different as well. And on the north end of Papay, this is Fowl Craig, or Bird Crag, so fowl is bird. And this is where the Great Auk lived, and is home to the auks that we've got now. So the puffin, the razorbill, guillemots are still very much there now. So that's where they live for the summer on the island. So let's begin the tour of the island. I'm going to whiz through this. There are 2 ways to get to Papay if you wanted to do a tour of the island. One of them is by boat, obviously a small island. Probably the best way to get to an island, I think. You have to cross water at some point, I think, to get to an island. This is the Golden Mariana. This is a scheduled service from Westray. It's a very important role to the island. It's a very vital role. It's a school boat, so it takes the secondary school children to Westray every day, back and forth. But it's also the minister's boat on a Sunday and the doctor's boat on a Wednesday as well. So a very important service, as well as bringing visitors to the island. The second way you can come on boat is by the steamer. It's still called the steamer, even though it's not really a steamer anymore. Twice a week we get a big boat from Kirkwall, which is the capital of Orkney. That travels 16 miles north to bring big goods to the island, whether it be a new shed, which I think is one just being delivered here, or cars, or building materials, anything like that as well. But everything is craned off, so if you drive a Ferrari and want to come to Papay, just be careful. Okay. The second way you can get to Papay is by plane, and probably the most popular way. And the 8-seater Islander plane is a lifeline service for the island, for emergency services and things like that as well. But it brings the post as well, and then brings a lot of tourists and visitors to the island. And if you did it this way as well, you'd also do the world's shortest scheduled flight. So between Westray and Papay, that's in the Guinness Book of Records as world's shortest flight. It's actually shorter than Heathrow's runway. It takes about a minute and a half. It's been done in 52 seconds though, but that was before there was runways in there, so then it was just field to field. Now they do have to turn slightly to get in there. Okay, and it's great to come on the plane. You get a great view of the islands, sometimes quite a scary view as well actually. And you see really how the islands sit amongst the sea, and often how tenuous their relationship is to the sea as well. Quite low-lying islands, and the tides are rising, seas are rising around them as well, so it's a great way to see the islands. And before you get to Papay, you may even start the tour quite early, because this is one of Papay's most important archaeological sites, and this is St Treadwell's Chapel, which you can see just to the left of the wheel. And probably the best view of St Treadwell's Chapel actually, because on ground level all you see is basically a pile of stones on a little island, really, that's it. But from here you get a real idea of just the ground plan of the site. It's a 12th century chapel built on an Iron Age rock, and that's quite a popular theme on Papay, that you do get layers and layers of history. Right, I'll just flip my script. It's funny, I've never used a script for a tour before, but it's kind of helping now. So St Treadwell's Chapel, you can see there. And St Treadwell's Loch, which the chapel is actually built on, is famed for its medicinal properties, particularly people with eye cures. There is a story on the island that a lady called Triduana travelled to the island in the 6th century. She came up to met with the Picts. She met King Necton, the king of the Picts, and he fell in love with her. He adored her eyes. She, being an abbess, could have nothing to do with him, so to get rid of him, she basically poked her eyes out and sent them to him and said, "You love my eyes, you can have them." Yeah, probably not the best way of doing it. You could just tell them to go away, but anyway, there you go. She came to the loch, bathed her eyes, and the sight was restored. Jim Rendell, who was my mentor on the island when I first arrived on Papay, he knew all the local stories, and he reckoned you have to walk around the loch 7 times and then bathe your eyes. But he said by that time you probably had a heart attack anyway, so no need to worry about your eyes. So the first stop on the tour generally is St Boniface Kirk, and really for me this is probably the most important site on the island. It gives you an idea why the island is called Papay as well. And the Norse named the islands when they arrived there, and those names are mostly still retained. So we're called Priest Island. So the AY on the end of the island, which would have been like that. So we are Priest Island, so Papay fathers. This is a 12th century chapel, and again this has got a kind of long history with it, so we can go back to about 1500 BC for an Iron Age settlement underneath the chapel, and then on top of that an early Christian settlement, so a 6th century monastery here as well. And most people on Papay would know this site as the Munkerhus, the monk's house. A real nice tangible evidence here. This was found in the early 1920s. About 7th century Christian cross was found there. I don't know that, so that's me. We also have a lovely Norse hogback stone in the kirkyard as well. So there's layers and layers of history there. And I tend to use that history quite a lot in the tours as well. So I talk a lot about the Orkney Inga Saga, which is an Icelandic saga of the North Seals of Orkney, and really our only written document of the islands at that time. And Papay's mentioned twice in the book, and one of them is that Ronvel Brewston, who was a Norse Earl of Orkney, was murdered in 1046 on Papastronzi and brought to Papay Miri to be buried, and that was our former name, Papay Miri. So some people think that actually Ronvel Brewston is buried under the hogback stone just here. Again, I'll often go back to Jim Rendell, but he reckoned it was a witch, that the islanders found a witch on the island, did away with her, dropped her in the hole here, went down to the shore, found this big hogback stone, dragged it up from the shore, dropped it on her, and she's never coming out again. So, next up on the tour, and I would say probably the jewel in Papay's crown really, is the Nap of Hower. It's a fantastic Neolithic farmstead, first excavated in 1933 by a laird at the time, William Trail, who was a very keen archaeologist, and he was adamant that the site was as old as we now know it to be, but unfortunately nobody would believe him. I don't really know if he was just a pompous laird or something like that, but actually nobody would believe him. In fact, if you buy a guidebook to Orkney archaeology printed pre-1975, this site will be in the Iron Age section. When it wasn't until 1975 when Anna Ritchie, archaeologist from Edinburgh, came to Papay and re-excavated the Nap. By that time they could carbon date the site, and she dated it to around about 3200 to 2500 BC. So definitely not Iron Age, and good old Willie Trail was right, but never lived to see the day when he was told that he was right. So this is Nap of Hower, a very important part of the tour, still with its doorway intact, and that was how it was found in 1933. Prior to that, there was just a big mound and a field. Nobody really knew what it was until William Trail took it upon himself to have a dig and see what was in there. And this is part of actually the midden at the Nap of Hower as well. And these oyster shells gives an idea that the geology and the climate has changed since the time when the Nap of Hower was built. I don't know who these guys were. They look like they were having fun anyway. On Papay as well, we also not only do tours for 5, 6, 7, 8 people, but also we get some cruise ships as well. And the cruise ships are quite a big contentious issue on Orkney at the moment, the amount of tourists that are coming. We get about 3 a year that bring about 40 or 50 people. And this is a tour of a cruise ship at the Nap of Hower. Once we've done the Nap, I'll take you onto the water and do the next part of the tour. We begin to head over to the home of Papay. Now, previous to my arrival on the island, nobody could really get over to the home. It's home to about 2 or maybe 3 Neolithic burial cairns. And it was always very tantalising to say, oh, actually, we've got some lovely burial cairns over on the island, but you can't go. So the Papay Development Trust came up with a plan to actually be able to get visitors across to the island. So they bought a boat, trained 3 people on the island to pilot the boat. I was one of them. So as well as providing extra experience for visitors, we're also building in employment to the island as well. So will provide employment for the years to come, even though it's quite a big expense. So gone are the days when you'd have to stand on the beach and actually explain the layout of the cairns on the home without going over there. And that's my attempt at trying to draw the burial cairns. So this is the Dunter. This is our boat, which takes people over to the home. And the weather's not always like that, but mostly it is. And the great thing about the Dunter is that the bow drops down and means you can get pretty much everybody across to the home and take them up to the cairn. It's a fantastic cairn, and this is what I call the Paths of the Dead, up to the cairn. So it's underground at the moment. You get access through the top of the chamber. It's about 70 foot long, a long central chamber with 14 separate little burial chambers off either side of that. And it's also home to Papay's only Neolithic carvings as well, which is another great draw to get people across there. As well as kind of Neolithic archaeology as well, we talk about much more kind of recent things as well. This was the tramp mill at Holland Farm, which used to be the home of the Laird of Papay. And this was used to house the horses, which used to power the threshing barn. This was built in about 1823, I think. So we try and include lots of kind of more modern things as well. And more recent discoveries as well. This was actually found the week after I arrived on Papay, actually. And this was a Viking sword sticking out the bottom of somebody's kitchen floor. Peter Anderson, who was redoing a house called Maybow, and he found the burial underneath his kitchen floor. I tried to convince him to put a glass floor into his kitchen, but he wasn't going for it, unfortunately. Part of my other job on Papay is to look after the kelp store, and when I got to the island, this was just a shell. Again, was a store for kelp being exported from the island, but the idea from the trust was to turn this into our heritage centre. So I used my background as an artist, creating shows and exhibitions, to actually kind of take on and give the kelp store an identity, and a much more kind of art-related identity as well. So it wasn't just a static heritage centre that had static displays. In fact, we wanted it quite mobile, quite alive. Being on an island stuck out in the middle of the sea, you need to shout out to people that things are going on. You can't just sit and wait for people to come, because they're not going to come. So we have to continually do things and shout out and say, "Woo, we're doing this, come and see us." Okay. So this is the interior of the kelp store with the cabinets I designed, just kind of boat-shaped cabinets which house different aspects of the island, whether it be archaeology, natural history, and things like that. At the moment, I'm also working on a dialect book for the island, the Dundee dialect book. This is the cover, which should be coming out in the next few weeks, collecting together and compiling all local dialect, and usually about the most important things, the aspects of the island that are most important to Papay folk. So houses and sea tend to be quite big ones, and weather. So lots of words for sea-related things and weather-related things. So collecting all those together to create a good resource for the future as well. I had to have the bird names in there as well, so lots of different names for the birds on Papay. And funny how the map thing has come full circle, because now I've just completed this map after doing the original map about 5 years ago now. And this compiles all the coastal names for the island, so all the geos, all the clefts, all the rocks around the island. They've all got individual names. So I've been busy collecting all them from the local islanders as well. And this is Hurty Geo, which is on the map before. I also run a festival on Papay as well, so we've got an arts festival which is in its 3rd year now. The next one is next week, which is all usually based on islands. So we pick a theme for islands every year, so something that brings people to the island, but also gets artists talking about things to do with island aspects as well. So obviously feeding something back into the culture of the island. And before we disappear to the plane, you have to see the puffins. Probably my favourite bit of the year on Papay, actually. With the summer, when the birds are there, the seabirds, it is a pretty amazing time. And before you go home, you have to go and see them up on North Hill. This is about just before midnight, actually, on North Hill, so that's the best time to see them. And then I'll stick you back on the plane, and away you go. And if you want, you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. I think that's about it.